All righty. Welcome to the Therapist Incubator program. You have myself, Buffy Andrews, and then my co-host, Brittany Patterson. We are here. We are going to walk you through this amazing program that we've put together for you guys. Just to give you a little introduction into who we are and why we're doing this program, I'll share myself, and then Brittany, you can share a little bit about yourself.
hmm
But basically, I have been a therapist for over 10 years now. And I own a group practice in Wilmington, North Carolina. And through owning the group practice, we've seen a lot of interns come through. We have received a lot of applications for new therapists to work with us. And we basically have seen a gap in learning, if you will, for a lot of therapists. And we think that it would be a disservice to not provide you all with this information. So we're going to go through quite a few different modules here through this program. It's self-paced, self-study. We're going to have some additional resources and worksheets and things like that for you. But between me and Brittany, I think we have over like 25 years of
hmm
something like that, over 25 years of practice behind us. We also have a varied background behind us too. So, Brittany is, well, Brittany, I'll let you tell about yourself. You go ahead.
Sure. So yes, I have been a clinical social worker working in the field of social work and therapy for 23 years,
Awesome.
and have been supervising new clinicians who are working towards licensure for the last 10 or so. I need to look back at my records and see when I first took, I guess it was
Yeah.
13 because it was when I first moved to Wilmington. And so in that time, like Buffy mentioned, I've seen a lot of new therapists who are trying to navigate the field, trying to figure out how to operationalize what we learn in school and see how that plays out in real life. And so we're really excited about offering this to you all so that we can just impart as much knowledge and wisdom as we have gathered over the years and hopefully make this really relevant to today and to what you're handling in the field on a day-to-day basis. And very excited. I'm really passionate about pouring into new clinicians, new social workers, and really just enhancing our
Yes, we are very excited to move you through these modules. The Therapist Incubator program is not just a training program, it's a personalized journey designed to empower you as a modern mental health therapist. Through a blend of our interactive sessions, personal reflections, and practical exercises, you'll discover your unique strengths, cultivate your authentic voice, identify practical ways to increase your profit, and embrace the joy of making a difference in the lives of those you serve. So get ready to thrive like never before. So just a little brief overview for you guys into the modules. So we've got 8 different modules. Module 1 is an intro into real world mental health therapy. For the sake of, we have a lot of therapists who come in and have no real practical application behind them, or maybe they have their 3 semesters of internship and then they're thrown to the wolves, and a lot of them want to start a private practice. And so we want you to be equipped into what does that look like for the real world. Module 2 is the art of being you in the therapy room. So how do you cultivate your therapeutic voice? Module 3 will be all about mastering the clinical landscape. So we'll go through things like documentation, maybe some court stuff, a lot of that clinical jargon, diagnosing, all that kind of good stuff. Module 4 is going to be practical tips and tricks for your practice. So, i.e., if you wanted to start a private practice, what is kind of like, the way of business, if you will, identifying your niche and learning how to manage your money throughout private practice. Module 5 will be more about lifelong learning and the path to success. Module 6 is going to be a lot of reflection as a measurement of progress. Module 7, we will be busting some common grad school faux pas. And then Module 8, we're going to kind of synthesize it all together for you guys. So tonight we're going to dive into Module 1, the intro to real world mental health therapy. And so first up, we have embracing the transition from grad school to practice. Let me see if I can move. I'm going to move us out of the way a little bit here. So we thought this is obviously very important because we have to embrace what that transition looks like if we're going to be a good therapist. And we have to have realistic expectations for ourselves. I don't know if Brittany, would you like to start or do you want me to kind of dive in?
You can go have a dive in and I'll jump in.
Jump in. Okay. So I think first up in the transition from grad school to practice is just the simple fact of recognizing that you don't know what you don't know. And the truth is you don't know a lot. um,
Mhm.
there is so much that I think is missing because really grad school gives you, maybe a short course on CBT, maybe, you read through the DSM a little bit. Maybe you've shadowed some good therapists in your practicum or your internship, but also maybe you didn't. And then you're expected to just jump out and be a good therapist. And that is really, really hard. So some things about, going along with you don't know what you don't know is the people you work with. And what I mean by that is your clientele, right? So your clientele and the people that you work with are going to be maybe a little different than the clients that you worked with in grad school, training grounds, if you will. Um, there's going to be a lot of different types of people. And I think it's really, really important to not narrow yourself down so quickly because you may think that you jump out and you want to work with one type of person, but then the reality of that work hits you when you're in the field and things might shift and things might change. And so that's okay, but it's all learning ground. And so we have to learn the people that we're working with and learn their socioeconomic status. We have to learn their environments, their systems that are at play. We have to learn supports and resources and all those different kinds of things. And we can't just see somebody as they come into our office, right? I think something that Brittany and I have in common that is really unique and I think allows us to be really great therapists is that we have done a lot of community-based work. And so in that community-based work, we had the opportunity to really go to people's homes to sit with them literally in their environments. And that is huge for actually starting to think about and conceptualize what are people really dealing with behind the scenes, right? People can show up into your therapy office and present one way, but they've got a whole slew of life going on behind the scenes. And you wouldn't know that or think about that if you just jumped right into some sort of like private practice office setting and never had that experience. So whether it's, doing community-based work or maybe you've been, I don't know, like a missionary in the field, or you've done some sort of intensive volunteer work, like learn people, learn what they're about. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Brittany?
Yeah, I think what to just add to what you're saying is like it's thinking outside of the office, right?
Mhm.
And we talk about thinking outside the box, right? Like this is about thinking outside the office and understanding what the office is important, right? That it's a space that holds, it's a holding space, it's a safe space for people to come and reflect on that life that they're having outside of it, right? And engage in a healing process that we'll kind of get into in later tonight and later modules. But that it's more than the textbook. It's more than what you kind of imagined when you were sitting in those graduate classes and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to have a chair and they're going to be on a couch or another chair and I'm going to have my tea and I'm going to have my, like, and just sort of be this like, space to just listen and hold people's stuff. And it really is about finding a way to show up as your whole self but see the client for their whole self, knowing that you're only getting them for 1 hour of an entire week and an entire month of their life.
Yeah.
And that I think is about, when we talk about theory, right? There's all these theories you learn in graduate school, like
Yep.
not just the CBT is one of the models, but you learn all these other theories about development and about behavior and about all the ways, diagnosis and, hopefully some neuroscience is thrown in there. And, but when
Okay.
you're sitting across from an actual person, right, you have to find ways to make that make sense to them. And it has to
Right.
make sense to you first.
Right. Yeah.
So
100.
I always kind of think about like the theories inform the work, but they
Right.
don't dictate it, right? We
Right.
don't come in just kind of like having the theory, like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do or how I'm supposed to handle things, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
fit with that person and you kind of learn them and let them kind of, their story, their experience kind of bring up some of the theory for you. And so
Right.
it's weaving together as you sit in that session.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that kind of goes with like our next couple of points, right? It's just that theories are one thing, but people are another. Theories are great, but people are people. And most of the time, people don't fit into like the box of the fidelity model necessarily for some particular, even the best evidence-based treatment models. People have so many variables that they bring to the table. And I think that that's something that's maybe not often talked about enough in grad school, is just truly how many different variables and nuances come with working with people. So really learning how to navigate the landscape of humanness is essential to being a good therapist, right? And so I think that that is almost kind of like the whole embracing that transition from grad school to practice, right? Is recognizing that yes, I've got a lot of theories, I've got a lot of frameworks, but now I have to like create, it's the art, right? It's the art that we have to do as a therapist of doing that dance and recognizing ebbs and flows and learning how to discern what people are bringing to the table and really truly just learning how to hold space, right? And so I think kind of with that, kind of going into our next point is the whole being okay with change, right? I think that's the whole embracing transition too from grad school to practice is that again, in grad school, we have our models, we have our, evidence-based practices, we've got our theories of like how to understand different socioeconomic things, whatever, Um, but the reality is, once you're out of grad school, you don't have that bubble around you anymore, right? So now it's on you as a therapist to navigate, to seek consultation, to, really bring these things to your supervisor, right? If you're doing licensure. And so I think that being okay with change is really, really important as we navigate that landscape. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and just as we're being okay with change, right? We also want to add that we just get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Right.
Right, because I think when we're in graduate school, the reason that you cling to the theory and you cling to the textbook is because it's scary out there, right? It's scary to go sit in
Yeah.
someone's home or how or like be in charge of an entire hour session. Like, how am I going to fill the hour? Am I going to give them something that they feel like was worthwhile? All
Yeah.
of these things go in our head, right? When we're new to the field, and so it's important to kind of get used to that discomfort and be okay with not knowing and be
Mm.
okay with calling an audible when you're in session and things like that, because that is really valuable to the client.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
many times I had clients come to me as the team lead when I was doing community based work and say that one of my team members or a previous therapist that they'd had who was a little less experienced, was just coming at them with a textbook, right? They felt like they were just getting textbook answers. And and I know what that's like, right? You do that because you're anxious, right? You
Yeah.
typically people do that because they're worried about, okay, well, I need to say this because this is what they told me in school to say, right? But that doesn't resonate with clients because
Right.
they're not a case study in that textbook, right? They're a real live person with real live
Right.
issues that they're bringing to you. And so, getting comfortable with that discomfort is really important as you get started
Yeah.
and as you make this transition.
Yes. And something kind of going with that of like, it's okay to have, yeah, your textbook evidence-based model that you're going through, right? And it's even like when I work with couples and I use the speaker listener model, and sometimes I present this model to clients and I say, I want you to sit on the couch and I want you to like face each other and I want you to have this model in front of you. And I want it to be awkward at first, right? And so and like be robotic about it, be, weird and like that's okay. But eventually you'll get the hang of it. And so with that, it's like that uncomfortableness of you might feel, yeah, really robotic at first, but you will get better. Um, and it's okay to also own things like that with your clients, right? Like, hey, I'm actually really new to this, but like, hey, I'm here to sit with you and I'm here to hold space with you. Um, so if something that does come up that you're not familiar with, don't fumble your way through it and act like you know the answers, right? Like that's the call your supervisor, call up a colleague, consult, do those kinds of things. So being okay with change. Um, okay, so let's like move on to setting the stage for growth and exploration. Um, we think that this is a really, really important piece of navigating from grad school into practice, because it allows you permission to explore, to figure out who you are, to basically give yourself permission to be okay, like we just said, with not knowing it all, but seeking to learn and to gain that experience and that exploration. I think a big part of it is we've talked about this before with just supervising some clients or therapists that we've supervised together. And just the idea of allowing yourself as a new therapist permission to work with everyone in the beginning, because that's how you learn best. Um, I think I can speak from personal experience here for myself and just saying that when I started out and I was doing community-based mental health work, I thought for sure I wanted to work with kids because I had been like a summer camp counselor, and I'd worked in the nursery for a long time in college and I had done all these kid things, but also I was a kid, right? Like I was a child when I was doing those things. So I thought for sure when I got out, I wanted to work with children and their families. And I thought, this is my niche. Like, this is what I'm going to do. Well, when I got into community-based work and I was doing intensive in-home services, I realized kids just weren't my thing. um, Kids were not it. Like it was easy. It was a good, I think, like dip my toes in the pool kind of thing for me at first. But I just realized really quickly that I was trying to talk to kids like they were 35-year-olds. And like that doesn't work, right? But allowing yourself permission, I also allowed myself permission to work with the parents of those kids. I allowed myself to have, when I was in my internship, to not say, like, oh, I don't want to work with those people, right? I allowed myself permission to have my very first client ever. I remember it was a middle-aged African American schizophrenic alcoholic. I mean, talk about being thrown to the wolves. Okay.
Mhm.
Like, I was like, what am I doing here? How can I work with this person? How can I help him? Right. Those were my thoughts. But the truth is, he and I did a lot of really good work together. And never would I ever in a million years had thought I want to work with schizophrenic middle-aged men. Like that would have
Mhm.
never been my experience, right? But because I worked with him, I learned a lot about that population of people. Um, so I think just part of setting the stage is allowing yourself that permission to work with lots of people. Brittany, why don't you speak to what you tell your supervisees, that thing you told me? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about some of the things that I say, right? So I think one of the things that happens in our field, and that this is kind of a side effect, I think, of third party payers, right? Of billing to insurances, that we have this phrase we use of my scope of practice, right? And that people will say, well, that's outside my scope of practice. I can't see that person because I haven't been trained in eating disorders, or, I've never trained in schizophrenia. I don't really understand it. I don't know how to work with those people. Right. And so, what I tell my supervisees is that when you're starting out, your scope of practice is basically nothing. Right? Like, you don't have any specialized training beyond like a master's degree, right? You don't have very much experience in the field, right? If you narrow your sense of that and say, oh, well, I can only see what I'm comfortable with, you're going to pigeonhole yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell my supervisees, no, we're not working off your scope of practice. We're working off of mine,
Mm-hmm.
because I carry vicarious liability for your caseload. So I will let you know when you're outside your scope of practice, because it's outside of my scope of practice.
Right.
And because I have 23 years of experience and I did what Buffy's talking about, right? I also allowed myself to work with lots of different types of people and populations in various settings. And I sought out, I get bored easy, I guess, but I just, I like jumped around. I have a really wide scope of practice.
Yeah.
There are very few things that I feel like, yeah, I can't stretch myself to meet those needs, right?
Mm.
So my supervisees also, I push them to stretch themselves. No, you can see the, no, you can take on a couple. You've
Yeah.
never done couples work before, but that's okay. I have.
Right.
Right? You can take on a family. You can take on a self-harming teenager, right? I'm good with that. That's my specialty, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it pushes you to really expand your sense of what you're able to do.
Right.
And then you'll figure out what you actually like to do,
Right.
right? Because you can't know that until you try it. And this
Mm.
is really, you're entering a field or entering a practice that really the only way to learn it is to do it.
Right.
And so
That's
you
totally
have to
right.
really open yourself up to seeing those the people, that the conditions that scare you, right? Those are the ones you need to take on. And you don't have to do it for your entire career, but you do it for the course of one person's treatment, and see what you think.
Right. Yeah. I actually had an interviewee one time who I was interviewing for position at Madewell Center. And, it's just struck me because she was a new therapist. And one of the things that she said to me, I was asking what types of people she would be okay working with, and she basically told me in a nutshell, like, she couldn't work with anyone over 30 because she hasn't done that yet. Like, as in she hasn't lived that life yet for herself.
Mhm.
And so her mentality was, I can only work with people that are my age or less. I can only work with people who have similar diagnoses to things I've experienced, right? And I just have to say, like, just think about that for yourself. If you were a client, like how limiting that would be. Think about yourself as like, think about when you go to the doctor, right? Do you only go to doctors who have, like, let's say you need your appendix removed or something, right? Do you only go to the doctor who's also had their appendix removed? Right?
Mhm.
Your pool of people would be so limited in terms of who you could work with, and you'd be missing out on some really great, opportunities of healing, right? Because again, part of being a really good therapist is just knowing how to hold space for people. Your ability to empathize with others, and we're kind of going on like this is like a little bit different. We'll get back to this in a second, but just know that we're going to talk more about these kinds of things in other modules. Okay,
Mhm.
part of like the whole therapeutic voice and things like that. But just know that your ability to empathize with another human is what makes you a good therapist. And to empathize with someone else, you don't have to have been through the exact same thing that they've been through. You just have to be able to do the work within yourself to recognize an emotion, to recognize a feeling, to recognize, and it could be related to two completely different things. But if you're able to recognize the both and then the feelings right from that, you're going to be a really good therapist. Okay. So that's just a side note. Moving down to kind of setting the stage further. Another part of setting the stage for growth and exploration as a therapist, I think, is to organize yourself, right? This is a big part of being a good therapist and knowing how to continue to grow and continue to explore what you're good at. You need to be able to map out your weekly calendar. And you may be like, okay, Buffy, what do you even mean? And what are you talking about? I mean, on your calendar, you should have time set aside that you can schedule time to read. You could schedule time to network with other therapists or other colleagues in your area. And you need to, like, maybe if you're doing a continuing ed training like this one, like, put in your calendar, even if it's just an hour a week, and every other week you have to pick something different to fill in there, even if that's all you can do, put 1 hour in that becomes your growth and exploration hour, right? And that hour can be, again, it can be a networking meeting, it could be doing an hour of a training, it could be reading an hour long amount of a book, right? But that needs to be part of you setting the stage for your growth and exploration, because what I see happen a lot of times is a lot of new therapists will get out into the field, and what happens is inevitably the 2 year mark rolls around on their license. And then what are they doing? They're scrambling for their CEUs. Or like if they're in private practice, they might have started out with a really good caseload, but then all of a sudden it's starting to dwindle. And they're like, why am I not getting referrals anymore? Well, you haven't continued to build your connections, right? So that's like a big part of it, is continuing to grow those connections and just grow within yourself. Part of setting the stage for growth and exploration could also be you attending your own therapy sessions, right? So maybe that's part of it in there for yourself. Anything to add about mapping out your week, Brittany?
Yeah, just one quick thing about that, how you're using that time for training, right? And to see, there's so much value in hearing from the gurus in our field, right? The people who are writing the studies, the people who have been in practice. One of my favorite trainers to go see in person is Janina Fisher. She's literally been in practice for longer than I've been alive. And so, and I'm not a spring chicken. So, and it's just so wonderful to hear from her, right? To hear how she sits with clients, how she thinks about diagnosis, how she, and so those times are really valuable. And as much as you can, to try to get in person experiences where you can go up to the trainer after and share with them what hit you, what you're going to take from their training. Building those connections and those networking opportunities is really important. And
Yeah,
online trainings like this one are great, right?
yeah,
But we don't want to rely entirely
right. 100%. So continuing on with being able to make that gap, that transition between grad school and real world therapy. Part of it is cultivating that mindset of continuous learning and adaptability. We kind of hit on some of this stuff already, but a big, again, part of this transition is just that recognition that you're gonna need to be a lifelong learner. You're not done just because you have your diploma. Like, you are
on.
not done because you've got your license in hand. You have not arrived, right? A lot of times we like to think, oh, like, I did it. Here we are. Like, I'm starting my career. I've arrived, but there's still so much to learn. And the field is ever changing, right? And our clients' experiences are ever changing. That's something to be fully aware of, right? So we have to be able to get curious about what our clients are experiencing. Meaning, like, if we were working with a teenager in 1995, the issues and the things that they're going through are so different than teenagers of today, right? And so when you started your, therapy practice and you were working with kids way back when, right? Don't outdate yourself by not keeping up with what they're going through, right? So you have to be, that's kind of part of being like a social worker, counselor, therapist, is learning and being aware of issues at hand. right? And that's kind of part of the learning process. And I say issues at hand, meaning like, even if you don't read the news or watch the news fully, at least read the headlines, like at least stay in tune with what the headlines are saying so that when your clients come in with these really hard issues, you can have really thoughtful conversations around it. Um, and kind of with that, I mean, our clients really can be our best teachers. So if your clients are coming in and they're like talking about stuff that you don't have a clue what's going on, it is fully okay for you to stop them and say, hey, I am really trying to keep up here, but I don't know exactly what you're talking about. Could you fill me in? Could you help me understand? Or like, hey, I didn't see that in the news. Help me understand what your perspective is, right? Tell me more about what you're learning. That way you can learn from them as well, and that's okay, right? But we are not using our clients as teachers of ourselves. Okay? I mean, you might learn things about yourself in the process, but we're not using our clients in that way. So that's a really really key point. Just remember that. And then with all of it, being able to cultivate that mindset of continuous learning and adaptability is to be able to pivot when needed. Kind of like we mentioned earlier, is when I was starting out in the field, I thought I wanted to work with kids, right? And then I was like, wait, I don't want to work with kids. Like, this is not my jam. So I had to pivot. I had to figure out, well, who do I like to work with? So then I started thinking about all those random clients that I had worked with in my practicum and even in intensive in-home, some of the parents. I started thinking, okay, what types of people are they? What are they interested in? Those kinds of things. And it helped me fine tune the types of people and diagnoses and things that I wanted to work with. But there's a lot of things that get thrown at you, and things like insurance, and we'll talk about some of this in the business module, business of therapy. Um, but there's a lot of things that are ever changing with Medicaid and Medicare and like opting in and opting out and like laws and HIPAA and all these different things. And so you can't, again, you cannot think that you've arrived. You have to be willing to continually learn.
Mhm.
Yeah. So any thoughts on
And
that?
make use of what the field is putting out at the time, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about graduate school, I'm not sure about your experience, but in my experience when I was in graduate school, I remember having so many resources right at my fingertips, right?
Mm,
There was the library. I had a online database that as a student you had access to. There were all these social work articles and studies and things. And when you end graduate school, it's like all of that ends, that access ends unless you pay for it, right? And so it's really important to think about, how do you make sure you still have access to the things that the field is putting out, right? Things like, the psychotherapy networker magazine, right? That keeps things that are being put out in the field that are helping you stay abreast of the cutting edge studies, or where we're going next, or how culture is influencing our field, right? And it doesn't have to take a long time. You don't have to feel like it's, oh, I'm always going to have homework, right? But having keeping yourself attuned to those things so that you can seek out, or know where you can seek out certain resources when you come across something that you're like, oh, I don't really know much about that. My
right.
client's mentioning this thing. I need to go kind of educate myself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that piece about remembering that you've not arrived, right? That it doesn't end with the master's degree, right? It
Right.
only begins,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there is this sort of this weaving together of client experiences with continual kind of didactic learning that you have to then take on yourself, right?
Yeah.
And allow your clients experiences to sort of stimulate that desire for more.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Kind of going into the more, well, first, let's read this fun little quote that I put up here by y'all. If you haven't read the book, The Gift of Therapy, speaking of resources, I actually really, have you read this book, Brittany?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. I hope so, because your face is right there. I really love the gift of therapy. I feel like it really spoke to, now there's some questionable things in there, but I feel like it definitely spoke to the ability to, again, find your voice and those kinds of things. But he had this quote in there that says, Abraham Lincoln is reputed to have said that if he had 8 hours to cut down a tree, he'd spend several of these hours sharpening his axe. And I think that this applies so much to what we're talking about in the sense of learning and understanding and cultivating that time in your calendar as a way of transitioning again from grad school to real world practice because we can't just dive in and fill our caseloads with 37 people a week and think that that's good, right? We have to say, oh, like I have to work with these 37 people. Well, okay, how many of these hours do I need to actually sharpen my skills, right? Sharpen my axe, sharpen the things that I'm learning, or again, pulling on those resources. So that's why I think it's really important to weave that stuff into your calendar as you kind of navigate. And then speaking of resources and like learning and those kinds of things, we just want you guys to really be able to identify the gaps that you have in learning. So let me move myself over here. So part of, being a practitioner and being out in the field is that there are a lot of different trainings or a lot of different resources. And you may come out of grad school and you may go, okay, but like what is next? What do I pick? Where do I go from here? And so when we were thinking about just how to identify those gaps in learning and make strategic investments in your learning, again, this is like a save money kind of thing a little bit because I see a lot of again new therapists who are like, I'm doing EMDR and I'm getting trained in
Right.
eating disorders and I'm a somatic therapist now and they pay like thousands of dollars on the front end and then they don't like it or they don't they don't really actually utilize that modality that much. Um so part of making these strategic investments and being able to identify gaps in learning is to start first, I think, with noticing the types of people that you're working with and who is reaching out for care. Meaning, again, you may start out in a practice setting thinking that you're going to see all teenagers or thinking that you're going to be, working with all, young adults who are just coming out of college or whatever. And depending on the practice, that might be who you stick with, and that's really great. But you also might be getting fed a lot of clients who are very different than the types of people you've previously worked with. So if you're going to start continuing to work with these types of people, you have to notice who's in your chair to begin with. And then start to say, do I feel equipped to work with them? Right. If you're getting a lot of young women who have body image issues coming in, right, and you've not done a lick of training in body image issues, but you have like a caseload of 50% body image eating disorder things, that might be a good sign that you've had a gap in learning and you need to do some sort of training in order to meet the care for those clients. Again, doesn't have to be some extensive, like become a certified eating disorder specialist. It just needs to be something that gives you a little bit of education. So it could be, again, webinars. It could be that you show up for some other therapists in town who's speaking about it. You could just meet up for coffee with another therapist who's trained in these things. And just pick their brain and learn, ask your supervisor, all those kind of good things. But I think first and foremost is just notice the types of people that you're working with and who is continuing to reach out to you for care. Anything to add on that one, Brittany?
Yeah, I think that, allowing your caseload to dictate where you invest on one hand, and then also always thinking about the long range plan, right? Which we're going to get into in a minute. But when you do that, like knowing that, don't, like Buffy said, don't go and like sign up for some certification that's going to take you 3 years to do based on the clients that you're seeing today, because your caseload's going to turn over, right?
Mhm.
So like she said, like kind of find, a 1 hour, a couple of hour, webinar that's quality, that's going to get you started on, okay, some good pointers, some good things to kind of do. And then as you get more and more of those little things, you can kind of start to think, okay, I actually do like this model, or I heard about this and that sounds like something that would really match for who I am and how I'm coming into my own as a therapist.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think with that, I'm going to skip down kind of the don't just dive into the next hot ticket training, but dip your toes in. Another great, tool for that is just to recognize that there are a lot of books out there, people. You can read a lot
Yes.
of books. You do not have to do what you don't have to pay $100 to do a 1 hour webinar every single time, right? Like get a book, get it on Audible, listen to it in the car,
Mhm.
listen to some podcasts that talk about these types of modalities or evidence-based treatment models. We're gonna put as a part of this module a couple of resources on a PDF for you guys that have some of those like psychotherapy network or NASW stuff, and then books that we've really enjoyed as therapists that have maybe really changed the way we view our clients that might be really helpful for you. So who doesn't love just like a little freebie like that, right? So take that resource list and use it as a way of learning. And even in your learning, maybe you start like your gears start going and your wheels start turning and you're like, wow, I actually really like this stuff, right? So then you can dive in a little bit further. Maybe you do sign up for the training after you've read the book. That's okay. So just think about it from that perspective first, is like maybe you want to read a book about it first. We tend
Right.
to go like extreme with our
Mhm.
things, and we don't
Mhm.
have to do that. We
Right.
don't have to do that. But
And just to jump in really quick around that, like just to give a quick example, I had a supervisee who had come across some kind of training on internal family systems, right?
mhm,
And came to me and was like, "Do you think this would be good for me to do? Like it's this and it was this really robust, like, probably I think it was like $300, and it was like a 3-day training, right? And this person hadn't really done anything with internal family systems before, right? And was looking for a trauma treatment because she has people on her caseload who are dealing with trauma, right? So we had already identified that yes, you getting some good training in trauma is going to be helpful, right? Coming back to that, like let your current caseload dictate things a little bit, right?
yeah,
But some of the developers of these models, or their next generation, right? Like they're kind of apprentices, so to speak,
yeah,
have been writing really good books that are operationalizing the model, that are giving you good sense of like what it looks like, lots of examples, and
mhm,
even writing books that are doing double duty, in the sense that it's good for a clinician to read, but it's also good for a client, potential client,
yeah,
right? And so what I suggested is get this book, right? Get No Bad Parts and read that, and then see if this really sounds like something that
yeah,
you are still drawn to, right?
yeah,
And when you read the vignettes of talking about parts work, right? And doing meeting place and doing all of these things, and like, does that feel like you? And does it feel like the clients that you're seeing are going to really resonate with this?
right,
And so then once you do that, then yeah, maybe you do the $300 training and go and get that model in your tool belt.
right,
Um, but there are so many books being written now that really make models easy to digest, right?
yes,
Because the makers of these models, the developers of these models, are thinking about that. They know that we're like, yeah, we just want a book, like,
right,
you
yeah,
know, to try to like figure it out first and then go to the big training, right? And so, looking out for those things. And if you're tight on money, because you just got out of grad school and you're paying off loans, like, the public
it's
library
like
is a
a
great place,
there you
right?
go.
Like you can actually do that. Or if there's a university in your town that has a school social worker, has a counseling program, right? Like you can
Yeah.
probably go there and have access to these resources without having to pay for things.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And so I feel like it kind of goes along with the other two, but I'm going to hit really quickly on recognizing that there's more to therapy than CBT. Um, Obviously, we know there's so many other evidence-based treatment models out there. And I think in grad school, I don't know about your experience, Brittany, but I feel like in grad school for me, we like hit on some of these models like CBT and IFS and motivational interviewing, but we only hit on them for like a couple of weeks, maybe, maybe.
Yeah.
I feel like the rest of it was like there was just a gap, there was a gap in learning there, right? So there's like so many evidence-based treatment models out there. I mean, you've got IFS, you've got EMDR, you've got sensory motor work, you've got, I mean, spit some more out, Brittany. What else do we have in the field?
I
So
can't even
many.
keep up with all of them
I
at
know.
this point.
There's
I mean, there's
so
psychedelics now that they're dealing
right.
with, like.
Ketamine assisted therapy. Yeah, I mean, there's so
Mhm.
much, right? But in grad school, we literally hit on like three or four for a couple of weeks. And it's not enough, truly. And so like don't come out and act like, oh, I'm a CBT trained therapist. Like, great. That's like, I feel like CBT is like the basis of so many
Mhm.
models of therapy,
Mhm.
right? Like, CBT is, yes, you can do a lot and you can be very fidelity with CBT and you can get really trained in that. And if you really love that, do it. But there's so much more. There's so much more. And so again, when you're trying to think through what type of investment do I make in my future learning, I think a good question to ask yourself is how will this training mark the future of my work with clients? Meaning, again, it's like once you've read the book maybe or you've listened to the podcast, does that seem like the type of work you want to continue to do? If it does and your current caseload doesn't really match with that type of work, maybe, right? Then it becomes, okay, how do you, and we'll again kind of talk more about this in like the business of therapy module, but how do you start to market yourself to attract more clients and then slowly funnel out the clients that don't really fit with the things you've learned and you want to work with? And I think another really important aspect of investing into trainings is to ask yourself, could this training allow you to make more money in your field? And what I mean by that is just because you go do an EMDR training doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make more money in your field. However, it also could because something like EMDR is a hot ticket, training right now. And a lot of people with trauma, when they're Google searching, what's going to heal my trauma, EMDR is popping up, right? So it makes you a little bit more marketable in that sense, which can make you more money in your field. But also, maybe you ask yourself, is this training a niche training that like not a lot of people have actually, right? Like for instance, in our town, I mean, depending on who you are and where you live, in our town, eating disorders is really hard to come by. Like an eating disorder specialized therapist. There's only like a handful of them here. And if you are really good at it, guess what? You're probably going to have a steady stream of referrals because there's not that many here, right? Or like if you're a Christian-based counselor or think about those types of niches that are kind of lacking in your area. And if you're someone who's really open to working with lots of different types of people and you want to be able to make more money in your field, that's something to think about. It's like, what's missing where I'm at? I'm going to go get a training in that. Right. So that's just some kind of things to think about when it comes to identifying those gaps in your learning as you transition from grad school to real world therapy. And I think just overall, I'm going to kind of scroll back up here to the modules so you guys can see them. But overall, there's so much um, that happens in real world mental health therapy that is so different from grad school. And we are here to walk you through that. We are here, our next module that you're going to dive into is called The Art of Being You in the Therapy Room. So we're really going to dive into finding your therapeutic voice, some questions that you can kind of ask yourself or ways that you can kind of practice maybe doing that. And so we just hope that as you move through these modules that you find practical resources and practical information that really make you feel capable and empowered to do the work that you're called to do because you paid all that money to go to grad school, right? So let's like fine tune it here together. so that you can be the best therapist or counselor that you can be. Thank you guys so much for joining in for module 1. Like I said, we will have some kind of freebie resources on a PDF for you that go with this module. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about anything, feel free to send us an email. Let us know, hey, I watched module 1 and I loved it, and I just had a thought about this. And we'll be happy to answer if we can, or we're going to try to start maybe a group processing with some of the therapists that do this so that we can kind of keep up with the conversation. But my email is buffy@madewellcenter.org. And again, we'll put this on the resources. And then Brittany's is brittany@madewellcenter.org. So feel free to email us, and we will gladly answer what we can. But we appreciate you guys joining us, and we hope to see you in module 2. Thank you.
Thank you.